Hello, Vroomers! This is the Vroom Podcast.
I'm Nick.
I'm Jack.
And this is brought to you by hats.
Yeah, so I am on assignment this week and in an undisclosed location. So I apologize aggressively for how bad my sound will sound. But if you're watching the video, we're going to make up for it with the hats.
Our sponsor of this episode.
Baseball hats. Before we jump into the main event, I really want to know what you think about how the F1 is apparently having a very hard time negotiating a new deal with Monaco. This was, I think, the last year of their contract. What do you think about that?
So, Monaco won't pay F1 enough, or F1 won't pay Monaco enough? How does this work? I forget.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think they have special deals with each track. They deal with each track individually.
Mm-hmm.
And I think normally there's like a race promoter, and the promoter, I want to say the promoter pays F1, and then the promoter is then just like left to their own devices to try to make that money back. And then sometimes they make a lot more back, maybe, and sometimes they lose money.
Yeah.
And then like Vegas, we were talking about, F1 is going to be the promoter for that race. So that's different. But with Monaco, supposedly, they're so special that they have like their own local broadcasting team, and they have their own advertising, and F1 doesn't like that.
It's such a shitty race.
Yeah, so that's sort of what I was trying to get at. Like, if they didn't reach an agreement, how sad would
be
it
that
be?
upset. It would
Yeah.
feel really weird. It would feel super weird because it's such a staple, but that doesn't make it like good or like it's really not that important. The drivers don't like it.
Yeah. I agree.
I feel like we've set a very negative tone for the next hour and 20 minutes of talking.
I thought there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about here, but I think like normally qualifying is the thing at Monaco, and it's can be really cool because they're right on the limit, but what tends to happen is somebody crashes somewhere on their push lap in Q3 and it sort of ruins it.
Yeah.
So even that's not great.
I have a question for you too. So Monaco is very important in its current status as kind of like a marker of what F1 is. Like that's what most people think of when they think of F1 when they don't know F1.
Yeah.
And that is like opulence and like Tom Brady throwing a football from a yacht to Danny Ricciardo on another yacht. Do you think if that's not around that could somehow damage the image of F1, or would that just be good for F1 if it disappeared?
That's a good question.
And maybe these other events are also now opulent enough. Like we're adding Miami and we're adding Las Vegas and God knows what else will happen.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that image part, but you're right. I think it's a positive. I don't think that opulence image is what... I mean, obviously they're very rich, but I don't really get that vibe from when you're like more into it and you're watching each race.
Yeah.
I don't get that vibe from a lot of it, and I don't know that that's a great image. I don't think that people really love that in general, but I don't think that's truly what F1 is. I think there's definitely a lot of money being spent, but I don't know. I think it's more like I feel like a better image is that they're spending all this money in the quest of the greatest performance racing cars on the planet,
Yeah.
and not just to throw around money on yachts and stuff.
On a track that no one can pass each other on.
Yeah, yeah, and in a tax haven.
Or maybe they should just have special Monaco cars. They should race go-karts at Monaco.
That would be really funny. They could, yeah, how could they do that? Yeah, go-karts would be good. I'm trying to think if there's like a way they can take the existing cars and like shrink them somehow, just temporarily. Because they don't really need downforce for most of it. So they could like, what if they just took off a bunch of parts of the cars? But I don't think, because the wheelbase is like so much of the size of them, I think that still doesn't matter.
Yeah.
No front wings in Monaco. How about that?
Sounds dangerous. Oh, man. All right.
Well, yeah, let's get into it. I did want to mention, they talked about this a bunch in the broadcast, so maybe everyone already knows this, but we were talking about how Lando Norris had hay fever last week, and apparently in reality it was actually tonsillitis.
Does that mean that hay fever is tonsillitis, or is hay fever still a fake thing in our books?
I think they were mistaken. I never looked it up, but I'm under the assumption that you were correct in that it's like allergy sickness.
He has hay fever. When you say that in an English accent, it sounds very serious.
Yeah, it sounds serious in general. I mean, fever, hay fever, that sounds serious. But anyway, let's get into it. This was a crazy... Qualifying was not so crazy, but the race was crazy. I feel like we're going to have a lot of stuff to say about the race. So let's go through qualifying, which I was expecting when I was watching it to be the main point that we would talk about this week, because I was just expecting the race to be a processional.
Right.
So let's dive into it. Before I go into my notes, anything jump out at you, especially at the beginning of qualifying before the big moment at the end?
No, I don't think so. I think it felt pretty standard. I didn't hear any buzz going on about any news in particular.
Yeah. I agree. One thing I wanted to talk about in Q1, I think that the race directors are playing it very safe this year. I think they're really, really afraid of making a mistake, like potentially mistakes were made last year.
Mm-hmm.
But and maybe this wasn't actually the race directors. The broadcasters had some things to say about this later. But in Q1, Yuki Tsunoda like just barely scrapes the barrier, and then it's like an immediate red flag.
Yeah.
And there were also some decisions we'll get to about the race where it seemed like they were playing it very safe, and actually, looking back on it, it actually might have had there might have been some other factors at play, but in the moment watching this, I was a little bit frustrated that they just stopped qualifying for basically no reason.
Yeah. Do we have the identities of the race directors?
Yeah, but they just change each race, so I
Yeah.
don't really know which one's which, but the FIA will come out and say who they are. And I think we know the stewards too.
There seems to be an intentionality about keeping them out of the media, at least. You know, it's not like let's go to the race director and see what they had to say about this. We haven't seen that at all. It seems like they've just removed that from coverage.
Yeah, I think that's probably very intentional. I think the media having access to the race director was bad last year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And apparently they say in the broadcast that there's a chance that this could have been like a local marshal just deciding manually to throw a red flag.
Interesting.
And I thought this reminded me of the Anden Cord, which is like a Toyota manufacturing thing. They would give all the employees the ability to stop the manufacturing process like immediately if they thought that something was wrong.
Yeah.
So this is like you can just manually throw a red flag and then it just stops the whole race. Like anyone has that power.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
that was interesting. But it makes sense.
That could lead to some issues.
Yeah. I do, but like safety wise, I think it does make sense. Like if you see something that you feel is really dangerous, you should just be able to stop the race immediately. Like if someone ran out onto the track or whatever, like you should be able to just stop it. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, Q1, Gasly doesn't make it through.
Yeah.
Zhou Guan Yu qualifies in last place. It just seems like he's not doing very well.
He's coming apart. Like he did decently well the first couple of races, but he seems to be losing it.
Mm-hmm. That's another one. It's hard. Like I do think he's had some bad luck with the cars, but a lot of the other content I've consumed about F1 seems to be contributing or attributing his bad results mostly to bad luck, similar to Lewis.
Yeah.
And it's getting to the point where I'm getting a little skeptical of the luck thing because it's pretty bad. Yeah. But that's about it. Q2 also not incredibly notable. My one thing that I was thinking about watching it was how Sainz was actually like right up there with Leclerc this week. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it was kind of interesting to contrast to Max's teammates, where traditionally Max's teammates have had a problem getting anywhere near his league in previous years, your Albons and Gaslys and stuff. Mm-hmm. And Sainz this year is way behind Leclerc in performance, but it seems like a lot of it is that he's just crashing a lot. Like he seems to be able to every now and then get right with Leclerc. It's just that he can't drive on that limit consistently.
Yeah, I agree with that. He's got that true pace, but he doesn't have the consistency that Charles has.
Yeah. So, interesting. Maybe he'll finish ahead of Leclerc. We'll see when we get to the race. Then Q3, as we alluded to, the drivers basically normally they get 2 good true runs at a pole lap, and one would think that they would push a little bit harder on the second lap than the first lap because they would want to get a decent lap and then they get one shot to really push to try to get pole.
Yep.
Unfortunately, in Monaco, there is no runoff anywhere, so if anyone crashes, it's basically an automatic red flag. Mm-hmm. And last year, Leclerc was on pole and crashed and red flagged the race, red flagged qualifying, which stopped qualifying. And if they red flag it with too little time left, they just quit because there's no way that they could actually get out in time to do a lap anyway. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens here. Checo on his push lap has a bit of another sort of inexplicable crash on the turn right before the tunnel. Mm-hmm. And I think that this seems to happen a lot this year. We were seeing it sort of attributed to wind in the last race, but they seem to just lose the rear end on these cars going into turns, like when they slow down.
A porpoising issue that we just can't visibly see, where it's just losing downforce and the back end's just coming around. But yeah, you're totally, the way these cars spin is unlike the previous cars.
Yeah.
Totally unlike them. You can see it. They spin just totally different.
Yeah, the aero's all different, and I feel like they're so good at designing these cars that a lot of the time you can't tell, but when they lose the car, I feel like that's when you can really tell, because then all bets are off. And
you can see the grip just goes for a second, and the car back end just comes right around.
Yeah. And like very good drivers, they just like Max did it last race.
Especially like
goes.
Checo through a corner. There's few drivers on the grid better than Checo through a corner.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, I mean he's not a perfect driver, but there are
Yeah.
a couple things that he's known for, and they even say
Yeah.
on the broadcast like that it's very surprising from him.
Hmm.
Um, so he crashes, and like we said, there's no runoff, and Carlos Sainz is following him and crashes into him. Basically, he's unable to make the corner in such a way that he avoids Checo, and he sort of also spins and kind of hits Checo with the back of his Ferrari.
Yeah.
Not incredibly hard, but then there's just like a complete blockade on the track. I thought that it was interesting that there's a bit of time before Sainz actually runs into Checo, and it's unclear whether this was enough time for him to stop if he was like really on it, but
Yeah.
clearly for whatever reason he wasn't able to stop. I thought it was interesting that Max was very able to stop, because I thought that it seemed like he was getting in his ears there was a yellow flag, which I wouldn't think would make him just totally stop. But then when he got up to that turn, he had to literally completely stop because there was a total blockade, and it seemed like he didn't have a problem stopping, but Sainz did.
Yeah.
Maybe he
Weird.
just had more time to react.
Could be a couple things. I would say that so that turn is at the bottom of the hill, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, you're right. It is.
Yeah. So if Carlos found out in the middle of the hill, he's shooting down it. Maybe he didn't brake super hard, and he just wanted to continue to take the corner, and he did. And then there was a car there.
Yeah.
And maybe Max found out before he got to the hill at all. And yeah, maybe it was also different info. Like you could just think Ferrari's radio would maybe be like Checo's in the wall, whereas Red Bull's radio could be like Checo's stopped, you can't get through the corner. It might have been more intentional, be like, hey, your lap is done.
Yeah.
Whereas Ferraris might not have said that, but yeah, that's just speculation. I have no idea. It is kind of funny how that plays out.
Yeah. And even more funny, at basically the exact same time, Fernando Alonso also crashes in a totally different part of the track.
Yes. I was away this weekend, and I was watching this with the friends that I was with, and we just started dying because there's like this whole snafu in the corner, and then the frame changes, and you just see Alonso in the wall for no reason. And the way he got there was also ridiculous.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have happened.
And so that's qualifying.
Yeah.
They red flag,
Yeah.
and there's not enough time for anyone to do anything else.
Yep.
So we get a bit of an interesting result. Max notably qualifies in P4, and Checo qualifies in P3. And all week, Checo has been faster than Max, which is quite interesting, especially considering that there was a whole controversy about Red Bull giving Max the place and giving Checo team orders to let Max by, and now he's just like faster than Max all
Yeah.
weekend, all practice, qualifying.
We've talked about this before, though. We've always said there's going to be tracks where Checo's just faster. It's just by design. They're very different drivers. That's just going to happen.
Yeah, and in the past, I think the last generation of cars, Max was just faster than everyone else in that Red Bull. But now this year, I think the gap is a lot closer. Just in general, even when Max is faster, I think Checo's closer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one thing we haven't talked about is the storyline going into this race of last year versus this year, and it being Charles's home track.
Yeah, that's true. We need to talk about Leclerc real quick. That's true.
And there's a big fact that I learned. I'm not sure if I talked to you about it, but coming into this race, Charles Leclerc has never won in Monaco. Not just F1. He has never won in Monaco.
Yeah, and he hasn't finished a race in F1 and
Yeah.
maybe also F2 in Monaco,
Yeah,
I think they were
I
saying.
think that's right.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Obviously, this is his home track, so
Yeah.
he's from Monaco. And Leclerc actually did have a very notable qualifying. So the lap before that the incident with Checo, Leclerc put it on provisional pole by quite a bit, by a little over 2/10. And he is on a flying lap when Checo crashes. And I saw in the interview he gave after the race, he said that lap is probably the best lap he's ever done in a Formula One car. And he was absolutely on the limit. He said in every single corner he was on the limit. And he said the lap time was coming, and he said that on his the diff on his steering wheel when they red flagged the race, he was 4/10 up on his previous pole lap, which was already 2.5 tenths above what anyone else could do. And he had to stop because of the red flag, and that could have been like an all-time great qualifying lap. It's a real shame.
There's a curse. He's cursed. He must be.
But yes, but at the same time, he still qualifies in pole and does not crash. So
Yeah.
much better than last year, and
Yeah.
he can't really have asked for any better result. But it's just a shame that we couldn't see him.
I
finish
guess
that
that's
lap.
just what he needs. He needs to be that much better than his curse to even like get an average result.
Yeah.
Like he needs to be 6/10 faster than the rest of the field just to get pole. Just to be a tenth faster than the rest of the field.
Yeah. And he's been so good this year that he can do that.
Yeah.
Let's see. So let me run down what we ended up with after qualifying. So Leclerc's on pole. Sainz gets second, which is great for him. He's had a lot of issues that we have covered. As we mentioned, Checo in third, and then Max in fourth. So we have a Ferrari front row lockout, and the current leader of the World Championship is in fourth. Lando Norris qualifying in fifth after apparently still being bothered by tonsillitis. Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I think he is really showing again this year that he is up there in the conversation for the top young drivers.
Yeah.
I
as far as
think
talent
he's up
goes.
there with Leclerc and Verstappen, and like he's in that conversation. I think if he was in one of their cars, he would be
He's
winning
just in
races.
such a wonky car. I can't get a feel on this McLaren. Is it fast? Is it not? I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's just specific. Like it's just fast in certain
Yeah.
ways and not in others.
Yeah.
And
Must
so
be
you
true.
get these weird results in different tracks. But
Mhm.
that's P5 is really impressive. I can't imagine doing that when you're sick in Monaco.
Yeah. That may have been the best qualifying performance.
Of the day.
Besides Charles's beast mode that he didn't get to finish, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and like you expect Leclerc to be in first, so
Yeah.
And then also you compare Lando to his teammate Danny Rick, who is in 14th.
Yeah.
Huge
Yeah.
difference. George Russell qualifying in sixth again, out qualifying his teammate Lewis Hamilton.
Who's his teammate, Jack?
Pretty definitively beating Lewis Hamilton in everything right now.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's luck, he is doing it. I know that Lewis, I think, he wasn't really able to like set another lap, and I think Lewis was still faster than George in some of the practices and stuff. But you know, every single week there's some excuse for Lewis, and so I think it's still worth noting that George outqualified him again.
I think it might be a result of what these cars are and how they race. Because we know George is a qualifying phenom. They don't call him Mr. Saturday for nothing.
Yeah.
And we know that Lewis can race, but it seems that the ability to race is not overcoming the ability to qualify.
Yeah, that is true, and I also think George is racing really well too.
He is, yeah.
So qualify really well, race really well, and we used to see Lewis just pull out these crazy laps in the final lap of Q3 in
That's
the past in that Mercedes,
Yeah.
and I just don't think he's done that this year.
Mhm.
Fernando Alonso qualifies in 7th after still he crashes, but still qualifies in 7th. And then we have Lewis Hamilton in 8th. Sebastian Vettel with a really nice performance in a really poor Aston Martin in 9th. We look at his teammate Lance Stroll in 18th.
Whoa.
So that's pretty nice from Vettel. I think he's sort of. I was thinking after he missed the first couple races and he just seemed not into it this year. I was kind of thinking he was gonna not do too well and just retire basically. But I think the past few races he's been performing pretty well.
I agree with that. Yeah, he seems to have found his stride in some way.
Yeah, surprising, but good for him. He seems like a good guy, so glad that
He
he's doing well.
He just seems so over it, though. That's what I don't get about him. It seems like half the time he just doesn't want to be there.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if in the coming back from COVID, if he was a little bit over it, but then maybe now he's kind of getting into it a bit.
Yeah.
Esteban Ocon in 10th, rounding out the Q3 makers. Then we have Yuki Tsunoda in 11th. Bottas did not make it to Q3 and ends up in 12th. K-Mag in 13th. We mentioned Ricciardo in 14th and Mick Schumacher in 15th. Then we have Albon in 16th, Pierre Gasly, a very disappointing 17th, Lance Stroll 18th, Latifi in 19th, and Zhou Guanyu qualifying in absolute last, even behind Latifi in 20th, which is disappointing. So that's our grid.
That's just so embarrassing.
Yeah.
I like Zoe. I like him, but that's just so embarrassing.
Yeah. I'm definitely, I'm in the same boat. I'm willing to cut him some slack because I know that it's really hard when you first start racing in F1.
Yeah.
And I know that he's a better driver than Latifi.
Absolutely.
But it's a shame. I am still just slightly bitter that Piastri's not racing and Zhou is, but I do think he's a very good driver, and I think it'll come to him. So the race on Sunday, unexpectedly, we get some rain in Monaco.
It was pouring. It was very rainy.
Yeah. So it rained right before the broadcast came on, and I wasn't watching the pre-race, so I don't really know how hard it was raining first.
Mm-hmm.
But it was sort of a mess. From my perspective, what seemed to happen was they delayed the start of the race. And actually, they said after the race that they did this because there was a problem with the starting lights. But in the moment, it seemed like they were delaying it because of the rain, but it wasn't actually raining at that time. And like Brundle is saying, like, the old school driver is like, they should just be racing in the rain, which I totally agree with.
We've seen footage. We know this has been done before.
Yeah. So again, this was like I was kind of critical of the race directors when I was watching it, but then it seems like there were some other issues that weren't just the rain.
And I guess that's what we miss when you take away the race director from the broadcast.
Yes, that's true. You just make your own assumptions about their decisions.
Exactly. Which probably, I don't know. What's the best answer here?
I think this is better than having the race directors on. I think that's a trade-off that is fine with me.
Yeah.
Is my opinion. Because it comes out eventually, and you see that, like, in the moment you're a little frustrated, and then you see that I think they were having power issues. The power went out in the broadcast booth at one point, and I think that might have been why the starting lights weren't working.
Jeez.
And that's, nothing they can really do about that, I guess, in the moment. Maybe this is another. I was thinking about how they were talking about how the Monaco is like running the broadcasting themselves, and that's like a special thing for Monaco. And I was wondering if this was happening because it wasn't run by the people that always run it, and they were having all these issues. I know with these big complicated systems, a lot of you get these. The way things work a lot of times is like you get these battle scars over time, and you just have a totally new organization coming in and doing it as a one-off. It's probably going to be not as good.
Interesting.
And then there's some confusing things that happen. So that delays the race long enough that it starts to pour. And they decide that they're going to start the race behind the safety car, which apparently triggers some rule that every car has to start on full wet tires if they're going to do that.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that was a rule. But
Me neither.
They kind of had to. There was so much rain.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't realize that was a rule either. And so a bunch of crazy stuff happens. We'll skip to the actual action. And I think when the race really starts, it is sort of, maybe you could do inters, but so it's kind of an interesting rule. But basically what they do is they do a formation lap similar to Spa last year. And I think they do 2 laps. During one of them, both Latifi and Stroll crash during these formation laps, which is funny because they're both paid drivers.
Yeah.
So they can't handle it. And the race is red flagged. Actually, so I think I have the order wrong. The race was red flagged first during the real formation laps before they really start the race. I think is when Latifi and Stroll crash. But they basically red flag, wait an hour, go back out, and then start. At this point, the rain has stopped. So I think that rule about having to be on wets is interesting.
Did you watch this live?
No.
Neither did I. Thank God.
I know, yeah, a lot of fast forwarding.
I would have
Which is
been
good.
incredibly upset.
Yeah.
Bored.
That's the worst when you start, because you can't really, I think, you can't just stop and then go do something else and then watch it not live. Like, once you get into it and you're watching it live, you got to finish it.
You're trapped.
And you're stuck. Yeah.
Yep.
So the race starts, and it's a rolling start, so nothing really interesting happens, except Leclerc does a lot of sort of fishtailing, which I thought was interesting to see. But then on the 5th lap already, Gasly comes in for inters. And he's already way at the back because he qualified poorly.
Yeah. So this was his only shot at doing anything productive in this race.
Yeah. But I think this is why that rule about the wet tires is mildly interesting, because you could see some of those guys at the way back just starting on the inters because it had stopped raining at this point. And then, that's the slowness you'd get at the very beginning due to lack of grip could be still faster than having to actually go in and do a pit stop to put on the inters.
Yeah.
But you see on the 5th lap, Gasly has no grip. And then by the 6th lap, he sets the fastest lap of the race.
Yep.
And so everyone, like I said, is on the wets. And that information, I'm sure, was very interesting to the strategy departments of these teams. They're watching him very closely and trying to figure out which tires to go on, if it makes sense to pit for the inters, or if it makes sense to just wait and then go straight to slicks. Not a lot of overtaking in Monaco in general, but by lap 12, Gasly is fast enough that he's able to start passing some cars, and he passes Zhou Guanyu, who is in last place, which is cool to see. Anytime they actually do an overtake, it's pretty cool looking in Monaco.
I agree with that. It just doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. And that we will see that trend does continue. But Gasly is then able to pass Ricciardo into the swimming pool chicane, so we get 2 passes from Gasly, which is pretty exciting to see one car just kind of trying to go through the field.
Yeah.
This will be the last that we talk about Gasly for the rest of this race, and so at this point, I I did want to mention that he said after the race that he thought he deserved some points for all those overtakes.
I feel like it's a very French thing to say.
Yeah. The aesthetic value of those overtakes were worth some points.
Okay, Pierre. Sure.
So now we're at about lap 16, and some of the midfield and leaders start to consider coming in for some inters. So Lewis Hamilton was the first one to try it. He's in P8. And I think Gasly was going so fast that this was actually, they needed to do this to cover off Pierre Gasly. If they waited too long, they might actually come out of the pits behind him.
Yeah.
And the next lap, Checo comes in. So Checo was in second, I guess. When I have in my notes he was in second, but I guess how would he be in second if Sainz was in front of him?
I don't know. This beginning of this race was so disorienting. It was hard to follow.
Yeah, the whole thing was quite confusing.
Yeah.
The way they were starting it. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe I wrote that wrong. And in reality, he was in P3. Apologies,
that would make more sense, but there may be something that happened that we missed.
Yeah. But anyway, he comes out in fifth place, right ahead of George Russell.
Mm-hmm.
They also tell Sainz to come in, but Sainz says no. That's the wrong call. I'm going to stay out and stay on slicks and wait until slicks. I'm going to stay on wets until I get on slicks.
I think that makes sense. Because it was obviously drying very quickly. That's why the inters were working. So why waste the whole pit stop? That's a big cost. How much does a pit stop add to your lap time? 30 seconds? Something like that? Between 20 and 30?
Yeah, maybe 23, 24. I think it depends on the track a bit.
Yeah. And it's really unlikely that the inters are going to make up 20 or 30 seconds unless it starts raining again. But
yeah,
I guess that's the risk they were taking, or he was taking.
Yeah, and Sainz has never won a race before. And so in the moment, I was thinking that could be a race-winning call right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even more so when on lap 18, Leclerc comes in for the inters. So now Sainz is on a meaningfully different strategy to his teammate, who is the favorite to win. And so that definitely could have been a race-winning call.
Yeah.
So at this point, he is in the lead because everyone else around him in that leading pack. There's basically, in this race, there are 4 cars that have a chance to win, both Red Bulls and both Ferraris, and everyone else is like way back.
Yeah.
Also in this moment... What's that?
Depending on a crash.
Yeah.
It's the only way they win.
Yeah, true. Yeah, like a safety car would close that gap and stuff, yeah. In this moment, Esteban Ocon turns in on Lewis and makes contact, which Ocon actually gets a penalty for later in the race.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see there's some damage on Hamilton's front wing.
This isn't the first time we've seen some racing between the Alpines and Lewis Hamilton this year.
Yeah, they're both like solidly mid-pack, so they're racing a lot.
And I think the whole grid probably doesn't like Lewis Hamilton. Why would they? But I think the two Alpines really hate Lewis Hamilton. More so than anyone else on the grid.
That's funny. Yeah, I think definitely Alonso, because I think Alonso and Lewis have had some history.
Yeah, for sure. They were teammates at one point, I believe, right?
I think so, yeah.
Back in the day.
I saw later on that Ocon actually in the next lap hits Lewis again. And apparently that second time was what the penalty was for, but they don't show it on TV.
Interesting. I didn't see that at all, actually.
Yeah, I didn't see it until later. They never showed it on the broadcast.
Yeah.
You commented actually that I think a few races ago, Ocon like cut Lewis off in the pit lane. You were saying that he probably doesn't have any respect for Lewis.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's true because he's just running into every opportunity.
I have a feeling like their debriefs before races are like just about Lewis. Like if he's in your way, get him out of your way. If he's behind you, keep him there.
Yeah, and that's it. Honestly, probably because they started right next to each other in this race.
Yeah, he's their closest competitor technically.
Yeah. So there's the setup. We have Sainz waiting for slicks. Everyone else is more or less on inters. And as you would imagine, Checo is catching Sainz incredibly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I think at like 4 seconds per lap. So exciting. We talked about it could be like maybe 24 seconds. So you'd get what, like 6 laps of that? And if he could put on slicks before then, if Sainz could, then that strategy might still work.
Yeah, especially if the slicks were then faster than the inters.
Exactly.
Oh no, Checo's on the slicks. Sorry, Checo's on the
inters
hards
at this point.
Oh, okay, my bad.
So yeah, if the slicks were faster, but in track position is king at Monaco. So if you could just get that track position, even if the slicks weren't quite faster, as long as they were in the ballpark, you'd probably be good.
You only need to be a tenth ahead of Checo to keep first.
Yeah. And I'm missing one thing. I don't really understand how Leclerc ended up behind Checo at this point of the race, but I do think Checo was in second at that point, and then Leclerc was in third, and Max was in fourth, because Max also was catching Leclerc really fast, like 3 seconds per lap, even though they're both on inters.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen this before too, where the different tires seem to work very differently on the different cars. You'll see them both wearing the same tires, and then they switch to the same other tires, and the difference between them is like wildly different.
Absolutely, it's so weird.
Yeah. And now on lap 21, Sainz comes in for the hards, so we'll see.
Yeah.
Interestingly, though, on lap 22, Leclerc. So I guess this was sort of the same. This was when Sainz comes in. Mm-hmm. There's a huge mistake on the Ferrari side, and they bring in Leclerc. They double stack him right behind Sainz, and then they ask him to box, and then immediately they come on the radio and they say, "Wait, no, stay out, stay out." But at that point, he had already gotten into the pits. I really don't know what happened here.
I mean, I think we were not the only disoriented people this weekend.
Yeah.
This race is hard to follow for the people who were even involved in the race.
Definitely. Like even one thing we didn't mention at the very beginning, they were changing the tires of the cars while they were on the track, while we were waiting before the first red flag. And there was all these shots of the mechanics with the tire stacks, like 4 tires on those things, the
trolleys.
rolling things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were like running with the tires. It's a pretty crazy image. But yeah, so this is a total mistake. I don't really know what happened here. But this causes Leclerc to come out in 4th. And the Red Bulls double stack at this time too. I guess this was probably the lap immediately after. So the Ferraris double stacked, went all the way around, and then the Red Bulls came in and also double stacked. And they are able to do a successful overcut here, which we don't see as often as the undercut, meaning that Checo comes out in front of Sainz and Max comes out in front of Leclerc. So both Red Bulls gain one position by doing one extra lap on the inters.
Yeah.
That is really important in Monaco because it's very hard to pass.
Yes.
So all of a sudden, after all this chaos, Checo is leading the Monaco Grand Prix with slick tires on that he could hypothetically race to the end of the race in. So he's in the position to win right now, all of a sudden. And there's also did you see one of Sainz's first laps on the hards, he has this like crazy slide, and he does this really nice save.
Yeah. Yeah, but that was terrifying.
Yeah.
Like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah.
Signs is off.
So this is all set up for Checo to win relatively easily, and then Schumacher has a pretty interesting crash. I think that the damage looked way worse than the impact actually was, but
Yeah.
he loses the car and hits one of those Tech Pro barriers, and just hits it in such a way, or the barrier does some weird like resonance thing, but the back two wheels in the rear wing split off of the car, so you see the wreck and the car's in two separate pieces.
It just split in half.
It's
It
wild.
was wild.
um,
And it looked like it came apart very easily.
Yes,
Like you said, it
weird.
wasn't a hard impact. It just seemed to have like, shoop.
yeah, it almost in some ways reminds me of Grosjean's crash in the Haas, where the car sort
Yeah.
of split, but obviously that was a lot more serious.
He nailed that barrier.
Yeah.
Looked like he had a vendetta against that thing.
And
Yeah, visually what happened to the car. I agree. It was similar.
yeah, like enough that the drivers, you could hear a few of them come over the radio asking if he was okay, because it looks
Yeah.
really bad. But he was totally fine. I think even when he was talking on the radio right after, sometimes you can hear when they've had an impact. Like I think about Max in Silverstone last year.
Yeah. Yeah, he was just like, "Arr, arr."
Yeah, you hit like 50 G's or something, and it takes you a second.
Yeah, he was not okay.
But Mick is like totally fine. He's just like, oh no, I don't know what happened. Like he's just totally. I don't think
Yeah.
that was that many G's, that much of an impact at all.
Right. But gets red flagged, right?
Yeah. So this is another race director thing. They do like a few laps around the safety car for some reason, but then they red flag the race to fix the barrier. And I didn't understand. Like it was pretty clear from watching these races, you know that they have to fix these barriers. It happened a bunch last year, and Massey would immediately just red flag the race because he knows that they have to fix it. I don't really understand why they did like 3 laps for no reason around the safety car and then red flagged it.
That's very weird.
Yeah, I just think it's inexperience on the race director's part, because they just brought in all these new race directors because they were mad at Massey, but none of them have done this before.
Yeah, maybe it's just that Massey had made that mistake in the past, and he knew to not do that anymore. So it just became his default.
Yeah. And I do think when Massey came in, that Charlie Whiting, the other guy, I think he died unexpectedly. So when Massey came in, he also didn't have any experience, but that was like years ago. So now he's been doing it, or at least last year he had been doing it for long enough that he knew these things.
Yep.
But anyway, they do fix it, and we get to use the fast forward function some more if you're not watching live.
I was fast forwarding a lot this race, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I was hitting that 10-second button like it was my job.
The one interesting thing about this red flag, though, is they still have the rule where they can both repair damage and change tires under the red flag.
Yeah.
So Lewis gets a new front wing, which doesn't actually end up mattering much, but also everyone gets to put on new tires. So this is about lap 30. But then we start to hit this limit. There's a limit to how long the race can take. I think there's a 2-hour racing limit, and then there's a 3-hour time limit of anything, just in general, once they start. And we're starting to run up against that because of all these red flags and all this nonsense.
Yeah.
So, which tires do you use? Because it's supposed to be a 77-lap race. They're probably not going to get to 77 laps. We get 2 Red Bulls on fresh mediums and the 2 Ferraris on their existing used hards that they were already on before the red flag.
Yeah.
They do a rolling start, which I thought they should have just done a standing start. Mostly because it would have been more fun.
Yeah, okay. So I didn't really have any thoughts about that, but it crossed my mind. It was like, oh, how do they decide which one to actually do here? And was that the right decision? But I didn't really think one way or the other.
Yeah, my understanding is that the default should be a standing start from a red flag, but then if there's a safety
Yeah.
issue, then they do a rolling start. I think if it's wet, they tend to do the rolling starts, but it wasn't. They were all on slicks by that point. I think it was dry enough.
Yeah.
The non-racing line was probably still quite wet, so maybe they thought that wouldn't be fair or something.
Right. Especially with a standing start because you're taking up the whole track.
Yeah, but Brundle mentions this, and I like Brundle because he's like this old school driver, and he's just like,
Yeah.
that's just how it is. Like sometimes you're going to be on the wet line, just let him race.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree. It's just kind of fun to see.
There's probably incentive for the race director to get the race finished too, because you think if there is a wet line on a restart, it's going to cause another restart.
Yeah, that's true. You wouldn't. They're already running up on the time,
Yeah.
and they have to get a minimum number of laps done to get points.
Yeah.
And you're right. Yeah, so maybe that is what they were like. They couldn't afford another red flag immediately. So
Yeah. Even with a race with things going wrong, you still want, there's incentive to provide the most amount of points just to like keep drivers happy and keep fans happy and yada yada.
yeah, that's a good point. That's true. I agree with that. This is great for Checo though, because he's basically not going to get passed on the start.
Yes.
There's just
Checo-
way less variables.
Checo, who had an interesting week last week
Yes.
with his contract negotiations and his race result due to his team's call, he's now found himself solidly at the front of this race. And he was previously, before the red flag, like you said it a couple laps ago, he was in a very good position. But now, post-red flag, assuming no other red flags, he's almost got this in the bag.
Yes. And importantly, Max has a car in between him and Checo, so they can't even do team orders if they wanted to. So he's a little bit isolated from having that kind of controversy again.
Right.
And then the other thing that we're watching for at this point, like I mentioned, is that the Ferraris are on different tires than the Red Bulls. So one would think that the Red Bulls would come out and be significantly faster than the Ferraris at the beginning, but then towards the end of the race, the Red Bulls would have degraded tires, and potentially the Ferraris might be able to come back at them. Weirdly, that's not what we see, though. They don't seem to. Max doesn't really seem to catch up to Sainz. Max is in third and Sainz is in second. And Sainz doesn't really seem to be getting dropped by Checo too much. But no passing happens because Monaco, so they just hang out together.
Asterisk. We're at Monaco.
Yeah.
Nothing's gonna happen.
That seems to be the case.
This is where I really start hitting that 10-second fast forward button because I knew this was it.
Yeah. So now some things to mention that are not racing related, because we have about 33 minutes left in the race, so we got to talk about something. They switched the graphic to time left, which I thought was useful. I wasn't really expecting that, but it's cool that they have that capability. Because what happens is if you run out the clock, they're going to let the clock go to 0, and then they'll do one more lap, and then that's it. That's the end of the race.
Yeah.
So with about 33 minutes left, they also mentioned that Lewis changed his helmet mid-race.
So weird.
It is weird, and part of me was thinking that was surprising because they're very particular about weight requirements and whatnot, and it's surprising that you could start the race with a certain helmet and then switch it. And I was wondering if there's some way that you could cheat where, like, because they weigh you at the end, but if you could switch helmets, like, what if you switched during one pit stop and then switched back during another pit stop and then somehow saved a bunch of weight or something like that?
So that'd be really hard unless they were both red flags. Yeah.
Yeah. Could you
imagine
imagine
like handing a helmet to your pit crew?
They have a helmet
they're all
team
connected to the car and like buckled in.
I think what they would do is they have 2 helmet guys on the pit crew. So they have, like with the tires, they have the bolt gun and then the guy that puts the tire on and off.
Yeah.
So with the helmet, they have a strap guy and then a helmet guy. So the strap guy unbuckles it. The helmet, actually, they need two helmet guys. One guy takes it off, the other guy puts the other one on, and then the buckle guy buckles it.
Buckles. And Lewis doesn't take his hands off the wheel.
Yeah, and it all happens in 2 seconds. It's really fast. And then if the buckle guy misses, then they just yank Lewis's head right off because it's attached.
Yeah, super weird how Lewis even started this race with that other helmet, and then he pops on his main helmet's like yellowish now, right?
Yeah, I don't really know why.
Like lavender.
It was kind of a cool special helmet. I don't really understand what the difference was. Maybe he just wanted a different visor or something.
That's a good point. Maybe they did have a different like gradient in the visibility.
I think when it's raining, sometimes they want a different visor. I think they were saying sometimes it fogs up and you just want like a different. So maybe that was it.
Yeah.
10 minutes later, with 23 minutes left in the race, we start to see, hilariously, they tell Fernando Alonso that he isn't going to catch up to Lando Norris in front of him, so he might as well just save the tires and not go that fast. So since it's Monaco, no one can pass him anyway, so he starts to slow way down, and he creates this unbelievably large gap in between himself and the rest of the field.
It becomes, I think, 20 seconds that he's behind Lando Norris at its greatest.
I think it was even more. I think the end of the race was, I think, a 34-second gap.
Oh, my, okay, jeez.
If I'm reading that right. And I think it was like almost 40 seconds at one point.
Yeah. I have another bone to pick with the announcers about this, though. Because, okay, so before I get into it, yes, Alonso starts going 3 to 4 seconds a lap slower than he was. And that is not due to the circumstances of the race, right? It's not like his car is slowing down. This is his choice. This is his driving that causes him to go more slowly. And the announcers say Alonso is significantly impeding the performance of the cars behind him, meaning that if Alonso were going faster, there would be more racing happening behind him, which I just don't think is true. Not on this track. I think that if Alonso were 3 or 4 seconds behind Lando and he was keeping pace, I don't think there'd be any difference in the order of the cars behind him. They'd still be racing each other in the same manner.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only way he's impeding them is he's just slowing them down.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's just the announcers trying to say something, but I that bothered me because I try to take the perspective of a new person watching, like someone who doesn't normally watch F1. Maybe there's someone who just watches Monaco because it's Memorial Day and it's on TV, and you're feeding them this information that could significantly impact the way they view the sport. They just think, oh, this one guy decides that this is going to benefit him, and all of a sudden the rest of the race is shot. He has, quote unquote, ruined the race, and I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah. The truth, though, is a little bit depressing in that he could basically just go, he can go 4 seconds a lap slower with no effect on anything at all.
Yeah, that is a pretty depressing truth.
Like if you send me that picture, there's a crazy picture floating around on Twitter and stuff of the separation on the two packs are just on totally separate sides of the track.
It's 2 races.
It's 2 races, and honestly, neither of them have any passing involved, so it really doesn't matter.
Yeah. At this point, it's the top 6, I think. The 2 Red Bulls, the 2 Ferraris, the Mercedes, and the McLaren in one cluster on one part of the track. And then the next cluster is Fernando and the rest of the people. And then there's 3 cars in the pits because they're dead.
Yeah.
I think it was 3 cars.
Yeah, I think so. Again, hilariously, second time I have said that in regards to Fernando Alonso. With 15 minutes to go, they tell him that they want him to speed up a little bit. I think because Ocon had a penalty, And all of this slowing down has actually brought a bunch of cars really close to Ocon, which is going to make the penalty. So they serve it at the end, and if a bunch of cars are really close to him, it's going to push him back a lot farther in the order.
Yeah.
So they're like, maybe you should speed up a little.
If it's a compressed slinky, 5 seconds impacts your place a lot more than a stretched out slinky.
Yeah. And so then he proceeds to set the fastest lap of the race.
He's just like, okay, I'll drive now. That's the fastest lap of the race.
It's just silly.
Yeah.
And then, so that doesn't really achieve much of anything, but he does set the fastest lap briefly.
Yeah.
Checo's tires start to grain, which doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, Lando gets the fastest lap because there's such a huge gap between him and Alonso behind him, and they're not going to catch George Russell, so they're just like, let's just pit just for the hell of it because we can take our time. On. Yeah, and so he puts on some softs, I think, and he gets the fastest lap. He ends with the fastest lap of the race because of that. And that is more or less it. The graining of Checo's tires makes him go slower, and you can see that Sainz is like all over him at the end, and he almost runs into the back of him a couple times in that super slow hairpin.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter. He never gets anywhere near passing him.
Yeah, again, I think the announcers were kind of creating a narrative. Oh, this is where the racing is going to start.
Yeah.
It's going to be passing. There was never going to be passing.
Yeah, and that's their job a little bit. They got to kind of...
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no passing. That's it. In that order that we talked about, Checo wins, Sainz in second, Max in third, and Leclerc ends up in fourth. But he does finish for the first time, so that's something.
Yeah. It's bad luck, that curse that I created.
Yeah. The Ferrari team does protest Red Bull's win after the race because they felt that both Red Bulls crossed over the pit exit line before they were allowed to onto the track, which is not allowed.
When they got their overcut, when the overcut happened?
Correct, yeah. Which would be contentious because that was the important part of the race. Since you can't pass on track, you have to pass with pit stops.
Yeah.
And the FIA finds that Checo never crossed the line. He didn't touch it at all. Max does touch it, which you can sort of see in the replay, but he never crosses it. Apparently, you need to have one wheel like fully over it. And so he doesn't get a penalty. So that doesn't do much. Other thing of note, so that's top four. George Russell finishes in fifth, continuing his streak of top five finishes and also beating Lewis Hamilton again.
I think George just had a great race, too. He's really driving the wheels off that car.
Yeah, super solid. He wasn't really on the broadcast too much, but I think super solid. He actually mentioned after the race that he really wished that the broadcast caught his pass on Lando Norris. Apparently he passed Lando on the track, and he thought it was a cool pass, but they never showed it.
Okay, George.
That's... I think that's basically all I have to say about the end of the results. Sainz felt that he was held up in that one lap with his hard tires behind Latifi, and that's why the overcut worked and why Checo came out in front of him. They didn't really show that on the broadcast either. I'm wondering if all these broadcasting mistakes were because Monaco was doing that this week.
I was going to say, maybe that's where our issues with being disoriented came from. It's a irregular crew who has a different idea about how to broadcast something.
Yeah, you might be right. And just different people being in charge of a lot of different things in general, potentially, was why it was so disorienting. Because the whole event, even not just the broadcast, but like none of the teams knew what was going on at the beginning either. Everyone was all confused and it was all over the place.
Yeah.
Let me run down the rest of the finishing order. Fernando Alonso, so just to say again what we said earlier, Lando Norris is in sixth. he does get the fastest lap, and he's about 12 seconds behind the leader.
Mm-hmm.
Fernando Alonso is in 7th, and he is about 46 seconds behind the leader. So he built quite the big gap there.
Mm-hmm.
Then Lewis Hamilton in 8th. Bottas ends up in 9th, pretty nice. And Vettel gets the points finish in 10th in the Aston Martin, which he's got to be pretty happy with.
Yeah.
Pierre Gasly in 11th, unfortunately, gets no points, even though he had some cool overtakes. Ocon ends up in 12th. I think he lost a few positions from that penalty.
I think true position was 9th, but the penalty puts him in 12th.
That makes sense. Let's see. Daniel Ricciardo makes up one position from qualifying in 14th and ends in 13th. Lance Stroll finishes in 14th, and then the lapped cars are 15th place Latifi, 16th place Zhou Guanyu, 17th place Tsunoda. And then the retirements, we have Albon retires. I don't even know why he retired, but he retired. Schumacher.
Some sort of like water pump issue with Albon's car is what I caught them saying. But I don't.
Okay.
I think that might have just been them guessing. I don't know.
Gotcha. That's logical to me because that's a Mercedes engine. And last race, the Mercedes cars had those water pump issues at the end.
Yep.
Schumacher also did not finish because his car split in half. And then Magnussen didn't finish. Apparently, he had like a power unit issue.
Okay.
They didn't really
they
talk
didn't tell
about
us that
much.
at all.
Yeah, I saw that after.
We didn't see George go around Lando. We didn't see K-Mag, or I think they showed K-Mag stopping, but they didn't provide any explanation.
Yeah, what they did show, the only K-Mag that I remember seeing is his reaction to Schumacher crashing on the replay.
Yeah, he looked very like upset.
Yeah.
I don't. Maybe you have a better word, like his facial expression.
Yeah, he did look upset. He didn't look worried that it was going to be painful or that he would be hurt. But
oh, come on. Like that kind of reaction.
yeah, like almost annoyed.
Yeah.
This had not too many implications on the driver standings.
Yeah.
Other than Verstappen does finish ahead of Leclerc, so he very slightly extends his lead. The differences between the points you get for the positions are not as high when you finish lower in the grid, so Verstappen does not pull away as much as he would have if he had won and Leclerc came in second.
Yeah.
But we have Verstappen in first with 125 points, Leclerc in second with 116 points. But now, one thing that does happen is Checo is starting to get pretty close to those top two after this win. He's got 110 points in third. So he's only 15 points away from his teammate who is in the lead of the championship. That could be really interesting.
I wanted to bring that up. That's nuts.
That's easily one race. I mean, if Verstappen does not finish a race and Checo does well, he will pass Max in the championship.
So what spot gets you 15 points?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
Because if the next race, Max has a mechanical and Checo
I think third
finishes,
place.
Yeah, so let's say the next
third.
race, Max DNFs and Checo gets third. He's all of a sudden beating Max.
It's pretty wild.
Changes things up a bit.
Yeah, and especially with those team orders they gave him, that becomes pretty contentious.
Yeah.
George Russell is solidly in, actually not solidly, but he is in fourth still with 84 points. Sainz gets a bunch of points and is now in fifth. Maybe he was already, but he's in fifth with 83 points, so he's only 1 point behind George Russell. Of course, given the pace in the Ferrari, I'm sure that he's not happy with that at all, and he feels he should be higher, which he probably should be, at least higher than George Russell. Lewis Hamilton is in sixth with only 50 points. Lando Norris is in seventh with 48. Lando Norris has only 2 fewer points than Lewis Hamilton right now.
Wow.
Which is quite surprising, given what we've seen.
We see them, like we were talking about earlier, the Alpines and Lewis racing. You would think that they would be there. But yeah, somehow Lando has snuck in enough points to put himself there.
Yeah. Bottas is in 8th with 40. Ocon is in ninth with 30. Ocon, you know, not like 30 compared to 50. He has much fewer points than Lewis, given how much we've been seeing him racing, like you said. K-Mag is in 10th with 15. Ricardo, very disappointing 11th place with only 11 points, and his teammate has 48. Really just bad from him.
Out-driving the hell out of Danny.
Yeah.
Lando is.
Danny is tied with Yuki Tsunoda in 12th with 11 points. Fernando Alonso only has 10 points this year. I think he's been driving much better than that, but he's just had bad cars and bad luck, I guess.
It's very odd.
Pierre Gasly also only has 6 points this year, which is a surprise. I can't say that I feel like he's been driving much better than that, because I feel like we almost never talk about him, but he just seems like a better driver than that, and he's being beat by his teammate.
Yeah.
Vettel is in 15th, which is a pretty good comeback from missing the first 2 races and also not getting any points for the beginning.
And
he's got 5
in the car that he's in and the organization he's a part of.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, he has 5. Albon is in 16th with 3. Stroll is in 17th with 2. Zhou Guanyu is in 18th with that single point he got on the first race. And then tied for last, Mick Schumacher has yet to get a Formula One point with 0. Nico Hulkenberg with 0. And then in 21st place in a racing series with 20 drivers is Nicholas Latifi with 0 points.
That's my favorite part.
Just keep saying it every week.
I don't care if we have the same name. I still love that part.
I'm not really sure why. I guess because like maybe his average finish is lower than Nico Hulkenberg's average finish, but I'm wondering if he'll ever do anything to get himself above Nico Hulkenberg in this list.
I don't know.
The Constructors' Championship is now in the order that follows. Red Bull is in first with 235. Ferrari is in second with 199. Mercedes is in third with 134. McLaren is in fourth with 59. Big drop off there, which is pretty logical. The Alphas are in fifth with 41. Alpine in sixth with 40. AlphaTauri in seventh with 17. The Haas in 8th with 15, the Aston in 9th with 7, and the Williams in 10th with 3.
Tell me, Jack, what did you learn this week?
I learned a little bit about how Monaco has its own crazy deal with Formula One, and how that seems not logical. What did you learn?
I have to agree with that. I relearned, like I relearn every year, that Monaco is pretty whack.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hype and not much to really come of it.
I do agree, but I will say that parts of this race I thought were quite entertaining.
Yeah,
with strategy
I agree with that.
And stuff.
Not the worst race ever.
Yeah.
We've had more boring ones, but it's definitely not. It's really not a highlight of the season, like it's advertised as.
Yeah. I do think that there have been some more boring races this year, for sure. But, yeah, definitely, like, most of it was because of the interesting weather, not because of the track at all. It would have been interesting, just as interesting on basically any other track.
Absolutely.
Honestly, maybe more interesting. I do think what we were talking about with Alonso, just being able to go 4 seconds a lap slower and have it have no impact on anyone else at all, is kind of bad.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be possible.
It should not be possible.
Well, yeah, that's all I have on the race. We're going to be in, or they're going to be in Azerbaijan in 2 weeks. Baku.
Off next week?
Off next week. There were just 2 in a row, so they're going to take a break week.
Yep.
I like Azerbaijan. It's also a street track like Monaco, but it's much wider, and there's a really, really long straight. I think it's probably the longest of the year. Is that true? I definitely think they get to top speed on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I like it. I like Baku.
Maybe we'll see some passing.
I think we will.
Some overtakes, perchance.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we will. One thing I did notice overtake-wise in Monaco, even though they weren't able to pass, it did look like they were able to follow very closely.
Yes.
Which I guess we're getting used to at this point, but
Yes.
they were, right next to each other, which was good to see.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Any other thoughts about the race or any closing comments, Nick?
Nice hat, Jack.
Same to you.
Thanks, man.
All right. Well, we'll talk in 2 weeks for Azerbaijan.
Peace.